Scarlet Nursery, where a governess who is a penati, which is a woman with very long, huge ears, teaches the Queen's children how to live. Here I shall set down some few of the things I told to the children of the Queen during the long spring of their rearing, when they seemed to my heart like fig blossoms blowing wild in white whorls around me. I shall also speak of my own love and thoughts, for no tale can be believed if the teller is a stranger to the hearer. Let it be known that in that life I was called Imtithal of Nimat under the snow, but the children called me our butterfly, because I slept with my ears wrapped round me like a cocoon, disappointing them when I emerged each morning still their old nurse, without spectacular violet wings or antennae tipped in emeralds. Of course, it is part of the duty of a nurse to disappoint her charges as often as possible. Children must practice disappointment when they are young, so when they are grown it will not go so hard with them. It is the hope of this small being that these tales might form a long rope, connecting me to those long-grown children. I loved them. Where they have gone now, I cannot say. That is what happens with children. They leave you. It is a kind of heresy to try to pull their little hearts back from the wide world and into my arms again. Thus, I am a heretic. And perhaps those who read this book in some future summer, I cannot know, will also be as my children. Many Lammases, many Ikrams, many Hoods. I imagine you all now, and you will all imagine me then, and together all our imagining makes a kind of family of the mind. Perhaps some gentle souls read my little letters even now, already as I am still writing them. For when a body lives forever, all of time is one thing, a single bauble hanging in the black. Perhaps when you have finished what I now begin, I will be your mother too. Perhaps I might even one day far from now, in another place, open the wings of my ears in the morning to reveal something quite other than Imtithal, and everyone who has read this will gather round me to be amazed, and Lammas, and Ikram, and poor Hood as well, and they will all run to me laughing as they once did, and so will you, and we will all of us lie in the sun together. First, I shall enumerate the virtues of the most famous of my charges, and afterwards my own. The royal family in those days were in the main part Kamatena, barring those who married into the noisy brawl or were adopted, whose hands are as huge and deft as the ears of the Panodii, which is to say my own ears. One of their palms spread open could hold my whole body, though my ears were draped like silk over their fingers. I spoke softly to them, cross-legged in their great hands, while they leaned their small faces in to hear. Lammas, whose wide eyes shone orange as a tiger's fur, Ikram, who possessed the most beautiful lips ever recorded in Penduxore, as deep a rose as I have ever seen, forever pursed as if she were kissing the very wind, and Hood, who did not love me until I had told him every story I knew. Only when I finished the last of them did he set me down on the ruby floor of the Scarlet Nursery and say, "There, butterfly, beginning tomorrow, I will love you for all the rest of my life." How strange children are, as strange as any story I have ever told. Lammas enjoyed best the tales of how things came to be. She could never quite believe she was alive and everything around her was real. This may seem a peculiar attitude for a child, but many think such things, and deeper and more peculiar still, but never tell a soul. How could they bear it if they, tremulous, asked after the solidity of matter over boiled bananas and lamb hearts one evening, and the terrifying grown folk laughed imperiously and answered, "How can you be so silly? Of course nothing's real." And so they keep silent and try to discern by listening whether anything that keeps them wakeful and shivering in the night is true. But in time, the dark closeness of the nursery, when all the stars have come out and the wind is very sweet, they sometimes confess to their butterfly mother. Ikram liked best the stories of love, particularly the sort of love that hurts and is never satisfied and comes to no good end. If it had been up to her, no lovers would ever have been at peace, but permanently masked, disguised, betrayed and betraying, stolen and stealing, mistaken at every turn and forever in the dark, reaching out to one another but never touching. She cheered when wicked men with handsome black wings kept maidens from their darlings, when hippopotamus princesses killed their rivals with vicious tusks and took as many kings for their own as they could manage, the poor males lamenting all the way. At first, Hood did not want to hear stories at all, so he told me many times when I arrived to care for him, stories are for babies and other helpless things. He sat in the corner more often than not, put his hands over his ears, which meant that his whole body disappeared into his huge, graceful fingers. I do not think he knew how much like me he looked in those moments, hiding inside his own body. But when I spoke of battles and gentle boys dying and bad fortune and young girls with hair like his sisters losing hope forever, I found him weeping from within his cage of knuckles and saw him peeking out. For myself, I will say I was born in Nimat, where the snow begins. Like all Panatii, my eyes gleam white as winter, and my ears flow out like wings from my skull, shot through with the pink of my blood. And whatever you think is silent, beyond silent, but incapable of the smallest whisper, that thing I hear as a trumpeting song arcing through space for myself and myself alone. We live in the high places where snow covers all things and hushes them for our sake, where the air is gentle on our ears. We are listeners, and before the reign of Queen Abir, and the cycles of all our lives were set by her prodigious hands, I had listened in the yak huts of Nimat to every soul who would speak to me, every creature who looked up at the peaks of our great mountain and called it the axle of heaven. And I wrapped each sore traveler in my ears, and they would lay their heads on my breast and tell me of such grandiose griefs and passions and histories. So I made the acquaintance of Queen Abir, around whom my ears could never fit. She wrapped her hands around me instead. Her body overwhelmed me. I could hardly bear to be held when I was accustomed to holding. She kept me warm while the mountain howled and groaned as it does, as it always has. The world has forgotten now how beautiful she was, how orange her bright, bright eyes. Come with me, she said, and make my children into good people. What would you pay me for such a hard and cruel task? When it is done, I will tell you the story of my life. So I ate my last meal, and the sound of ice beer trickling into a cup, and the melody of bone stew boiling. I kissed everyone who would bear kisses. I went with her, seeking that story. I followed her to the warmth of Pentixore and the Alcazur with its amethyst columns, and that red, red room, with all its silk and garnet toys and wooden scepters banging against bedposts. This is the first story I told the children, when the heavy summer rains had come and banana leaves clung to the window papers, and they would not be calmed by any song or game. I will tell it to you as I told it to them, and where they would not let me go on until I satisfied their endless, urgent questions, I will not go on until I had answered them. You must know my audience to understand my tales, for as all tellers do, I molded each story to their little hearts, to their savage ears. I began with a question. This is a very good way to begin a story. The question was, do you know how the world began? Lammas, who always answered, Mother made it. Ikram, who always argued, she did not. Grandmother made her, so if anyone made it, grandmother must have. Hood, who always frowned, I think the world was baked, like the apricot cake we had for supper. The apricots are the stars, and the cake is earth, and the wine is souls, I suppose, or blood. Not that I care. And I, who was always patient, in the beginning were the spheres, and the spheres were with us, and the spheres were us. Think of the little glass balls Rasno, the Phoenix King, brings you when he visits, all clear and shining, in so many colors, and how you love bashing one against the other, even though they never break, for Rasno knows you too well. They make such a lovely sound, don't they? Well, imagine thousands and thousands of them all crowded together in a long black void, hanging like lanterns, silver and gold and scarlet and violet. The only sound in the beginning of the world was the spheres creaking against one another as the lightless wind of the void rustled through. Ikram, who demanded walnut milk before bed. If it was a void, how could there be wind? Where the wind came from, we cannot know. There has always been wind. because there has always been change, and wind is the sound that changing makes. Hood, who didn't care. That's stupid. How could there be change if the world hadn't even begun yet? I answered the needful grasping hands of my charges. The world didn't begin only once. The spheres, milky and rose, crystal and gold, clanged one against the other in the darkness, for they were as blind as they were bright. Now you will ask me, why did they not go along, scraping and knocking as they always had forever, which would have meant no scarlet bedclothes or walnut milk or mother or lammas or yukam or even food, even though he wouldn't care if they just kept on bumping along forever. I have no answer, except that nothing can stay as it is for all time, no matter how sweet, no matter how bright in the black, no matter how much we might wish that all we love could stop and hold its breath in our arms, things will insist on happening. Catastrophe is natural, my darlings, perhaps the only natural thing. And so though there can be no reason it occurred at the moment it did, and not another moment or another, one of the spheres cracked. It was the crystal in heaven who did it, as best folk, much wiser than your Imtithal can measure it. Why the crystal in heaven and not the benevolent gold of the sun sphere or the base metal of the leaden spheres? Lean in, and I will tell you a secret. Because the heaven was lonely, and it had a weakness in its upper hemisphere due to some trauma in its mysterious infancy. It is important that you know this, that loneliness and weakness were always part of us. The sphere of heaven ground slowly through the windy pitch and crushed against the benevolent silver of the sphere of the moon. All along its rose-colored meridians, the orb of heaven cracked and splintered and shivered. Lines of gold like fire appeared in its great face. Glass formed and bubbled in long rivers, and in the beginning of everything it cried out as the sphere of the moon passed into the sphere of heaven. Where the moon had entered, so the sun followed, and Mercury lined with quicksilver, Jupiter hot and moist, and all of the planetary spheres and elemental spheres, one after the other like one of Vikram's poor dolls. The crystal in heaven swelled with all it contained and lost its rosy color, becoming instead the color of black glass. Thus when we look upward in the evening, we see the very furthest rim of heaven that can be seen from where we stand, on the last and smallest and best of the spheres, the habitation of the blessed, our own dear earth. Being lowest, it falls to us to anchor the rest. In a place utterly hidden, somewhere in our gentle world, a pin is fixed that keeps all things turning. The pin is called the spindle of necessity, and all the rest whirls around it, bound and tethered by invisible strands. But each of those spheres is studded with a world like our own, as a ring is studded with a gem, and though we may not go there, we can imagine how, perhaps on furthest silvery Saturn, another Imtithal speaks softly to another Lammas, another Ikram, but not another Hood, for on no heavenly sphere is there a Hood who likes stories or can keep quiet. All you see and can be seen is fashioned from the stuff of the spheres. The sea is where the benevolent silver of the moon meets Venus. The Panodii are the children of Saturn, fixed and colorless stars who dwell in the deeps. You Kamatena carry shards of Jupiter and Mars within you, the jasper and ruby spheres of such hot-hearted worlds, born in the strange circling of spheres within spheres, that motion which only the Panodii can hear. I can hear it now, ever so softly, the flowing music like a sea, a tide moving round and round and round us, singing its private songs as it goes. It says, "Go to bed, little ones. Fold your great hands over your small hearts and listen to your nurse." Hood, who did not like being teased, even in a story. Imtithal, what was there before the spheres? Did someone make them? Is someone out there beyond the spheres who made everything and watches us and loves us and punishes us? And I thought on this for a long time, for some many folk do think so and tell such stories of gods with swords that drip with flowers, of the moon walking upon the earth in a dress of deerskin. But to that child I owed nothing more or less than my whole heart, and all I believed and knew to be true. And this is what I said to him. "No, my golden eyes. There is only us, making and watching and loving and punishing. Only us, sleeping down below the stars.